"I can't be a mother," the black bride whispered to the weathered rancher, dust swirling around her worn boots as townspeople watched with disapproving eyes. He smiled gently. "I've got 3 calling you mama already." The frontier town branded her barren, cursed, a woman who'd failed at her most basic purpose. Whispers followed her every step. She was destined for loneliness, unwanted by any decent man. But the mountain of a rancher saw something different in her trembling confession, something that matched the desperate need of 3 orphan children who'd driven away every caretaker before her. What he hadn't told her yet would change everything. These weren't just any orphans. Their hidden truth carried a danger that could destroy them all, and only someone willing to risk everything for love could save them. Would this broken woman become their salvation, or would the town's secrets bury them all? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in the dusty street of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory. Serafina Bellamy stepped down with careful dignity, her dark skin gleaming with perspiration under the merciless sun. She carried only a worn carpet bag and a letter of introduction that felt heavier than lead in her gloved hand. The whispers started immediately. Women in faded bonnets leaned close to each other on the wooden sidewalk. Their eyes tracked every movement as Serafina smoothed her traveling dress and lifted her chin. A shopkeeper's wife spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's the one Martha wrote about, the barren one from St. Louis." Serafina's steps never faltered. She had heard worse, much worse. The memories crashed over her like a cold wave, standing in the courthouse while her husband's lawyer read the divorce papers aloud. The word barren echoing off the marble walls. Her teaching position vanishing overnight. Former friends crossing the street to avoid her. The slow, suffocating realization that society had no place for a woman who couldn't fulfill her most basic purpose. She had come west to disappear, to find some forgotten corner where her failure might not define her every breath. The Grady homestead sat 5 miles outside town, a collection of weathered buildings against the backdrop of red mesas. Serafina's borrowed horse picked its way carefully down the rutted path. Dust devils danced in the distance like ghosts. Liam Grady emerged from the barn as she approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. His clothes were patched but clean. His eyes held a wariness that matched her own. 3 children peered out from behind him like cautious deer. A girl of about 12 with serious dark eyes. A boy near 9 who ducked his head when Serafina looked his way. A tiny girl who couldn't be more than 5, with tangled curls and a thumb in her mouth. Serafina dismounted with practiced grace. "Mr. Grady, I'm here about the housekeeping position." He nodded toward the children. "These are mine, Annabelle, Jessie, and Ruthie." The children studied her with the intensity of small creatures evaluating a predator. Serafina recognized the look. She had worn it herself as a child in the orphanage. "I must be honest with you, Mr. Grady." The words tasted like ashes. "I can't be a mother. I can't have children." Liam's weathered face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen in months. "Good thing. I've got 3 calling you mama already." Little Ruthie stepped forward and slipped her small hand into Serafina's. The gesture was so unexpected, so trusting, that Serafina's breath caught. The next few days blurred together in a haze of cooking, cleaning, and cautious conversations. The children watched her every move. Annabelle tested her with difficult questions about geography and arithmetic. Jessie stuttered when he tried to speak, then fled to the barn in embarrassment. Ruthie simply followed her everywhere like a devoted shadow. Serafina found herself falling into rhythms she had never experienced. Reading bedtime stories by lamplight, braiding Annabelle's hair, teaching Jessie to sound out words without the crushing pressure that made his tongue tie itself in knots. On her 4th day, she volunteered to clean Liam's study. The small room held a desk, a few books, and a wooden filing box that looked like it had seen better days. As she dusted around the papers, her eye caught something that made her freeze, legal documents, carefully hidden beneath a stack of ranch receipts. Her hands shook as she lifted the papers, birth certificates with names that didn't match the children she knew, a hastily written will from a Texas rancher she'd never heard of. Letters from lawyers demanding information about 3 mulatto children who had disappeared after their mother's death. The truth hit her like a physical blow. These weren't just orphans. They were mixed-race children whose very existence posed a danger in a world that barely tolerated differences. Liam wasn't just their guardian. He was their shield against a society that would destroy them if it knew the truth. She understood now why previous housekeepers had left without warning, why Liam's eyes held such wariness, why the children clung to shadows and startled at unexpected sounds. Serafina sank into the desk chair, her mind racing. She could leave, pack her carpet bag and disappear into another anonymous town, protect herself from yet another scandal that could follow her for the rest of her life. But Ruthie's trusting hand in hers flashed through her memory, Jesse's proud smile when he read a full sentence without stumbling, Annabelle's fierce protection of her younger siblings. These children knew what it felt like to be judged for circumstances beyond their control. They understood the weight of society's condemnation. They were outcasts, just like her. For the first time in years, Serafina wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. That evening, she found Liam mending fence behind the barn. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the exact moment he realized she knew. "I found the papers," she said quietly. His shoulders sagged. "I'll pay your fare to wherever you want to go." Serafina squared her shoulders and met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. Or relief. "Those children need someone who understands what it's like to be different," she continued. "Someone who knows that family isn't always about blood." Liam nodded slowly. "It's dangerous. People find out the truth about them. Then we make sure they don't." Serafina's voice carried a strength she hadn't felt in months. "We give them the childhood they deserve." As if summoned by their conversation, 3 small faces appeared at the kitchen window, watching, waiting, hoping. Serafina had spent years believing she had failed at the most important thing a woman could do. But looking at those faces, she realized she had been wrong about everything. She wasn't running from motherhood anymore. She was walking straight into it. The transformation began at dawn. Serafina moved through the house with new purpose, her steps lighter despite the weight of the truth she now carried. She wasn't just keeping house anymore. She was building a fortress of normalcy around 3 vulnerable lives. In the kitchen, she turned breakfast into arithmetic. "Ruthie, if we need 4 eggs for each person, how many do we collect?" The little girl counted carefully on her fingers, beaming when she reached the right answer. Annabelle rolled her eyes at the simple math, but Serafina caught her smile. Jesse lingered at the edges, still fighting his stutter. Every word felt like a battle in his mouth. Serafina had seen this before in her St. Louis classroom. Fear made everything harder. "Jesse, would you help me with the horses?" she asked after breakfast. He nodded eagerly, grateful for a task that didn't require speech. In the barn, she showed him how to brush the mare's coat in long, smooth strokes. "Sometimes words get tangled when we rush them," she said quietly. "Just like brushing hair. Slow and steady works better than fast and frantic." He looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. "You Saint stuttered too?" "Every day until I was 13. My teacher made me recite poetry until the rhythm became natural." Serafina handed him the brush. "Words have their own music. You just need to find yours." By afternoon, Jesse was reading aloud from a book of folk tales. His voice still caught occasionally, but the panic had left his eyes. Serafina's chest tightened with a familiar joy she thought she'd lost forever. This was why she had become a teacher. This moment when a child's confidence bloomed. Liam watched from the doorway, something shifting in his expression. Later, as they prepared dinner together, he spoke quietly. "You're not just helping them learn, you're healing them." Serafina's hands stilled on the bread dough. They're healing me too. The first real test came on market day. Copper Creek's main street bustled with ranchers and their families. Serafina walked beside the children, her head high despite the stares and whispers that followed them. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson made a show of serving every other customer first. When Serafina finally reached the counter, the woman's lips pursed in disapproval. "That'll be $2 extra," Mrs. Patterson announced. "Special handling fee." Jesse stepped closer to Serafina, his small hand finding hers. She squeezed gently and placed the exact change on the counter. No extra fees. No argument. Just quiet dignity that somehow made Mrs. Patterson look smaller. They were loading supplies into the wagon when trouble found them. Billy Morrison, a boy twice Jesse's size, blocked their path with two friends flanking him like deputies. "My pa says you don't belong here," Billy sneered at Jesse. "Says your kind should know better than to show your face in town." Jesse's stutter returned with crushing force. "I don't want any trouble." "Too bad. Trouble found you anyway." Billy shoved Jesse hard. The boy stumbled backward, books scattering in the dust. Annabelle moved to help him, but Serafina was already there. She placed herself between Billy and Jesse with the fluid grace of someone who had faced bullies before. Her voice carried the authority of every classroom she had ever commanded. "That's enough," Billy laughed. "You can't tell me what to do. You're nobody. I'm his mother." The words rang across the street like a bell. "And if you touch him again, you'll answer to me." Billy's father emerged from the saloon, his face flushed with drink and anger. "What's this about, Billy?" "She threatened me, Pa. That woman there." Mr. Morrison swaggered over, his bulk casting a shadow over them. "You got some nerve, woman. Threatening a white boy." Serafina never flinched. "I protected my son from a bully. Nothing more, nothing less." "Your son?" Morrison's laugh was ugly. "Everyone knows what you are, what they are. Don't pretend you're some proper family." "He's mine on every day that matters," Serafina said clearly. "Every morning when I braid his hair. Every evening when I help with his reading. Every night when I tuck him into bed. What makes him mine isn't the color of our skin. It's the choice I make every single day to love him." A crowd had gathered. Serafina felt their eyes like weights on her shoulders. But Jesse stepped forward, his small frame straightening with new courage. "She is my mama," he said, his stutter barely noticeable. "And I'm proud of it." Ruthie grabbed Serafina's other hand. "Me too." Even Annabelle, usually so careful about drawing attention, moved closer. "She's the best mother we've ever had." The crowd murmured among themselves. Some faces showed approval, others remained hard with prejudice. But something had shifted in the air. Eli Forsythe, the schoolteacher, pushed through the circle. He was a thin man with kind eyes and ink stains on his fingers. "Mrs. Bellamy, isn't it? I've heard about your teaching methods from young Jesse here." Serafina nodded cautiously. "Any woman who can turn a stammering boy into a confident reader deserves our respect, not our suspicion." Eli's voice carried clearly. "Jesse's been reading to my students. His improvement is remarkable." Morrison spat in the dust. "Don't matter what tricks she teaches. They still don't belong." "Neither did my Irish grandfather," Eli replied calmly. "Neither did your German wife when she first arrived. But Copper Creek has room for families who contribute to our community." The crowd began to disperse. Morrison retreated with his son, but not before shooting Serafina a look that promised future trouble. As they finished loading the wagon, Jesse tugged on Serafina's skirt. "Mama Sarah, are you really proud of us?" Serafina knelt to meet his eyes. Around them, Annabelle and Ruthie waited for her answer with the intensity of flowers turning toward sunlight. "Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life." That night, after the children were asleep, Liam found her on the porch. He sat beside her in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the desert. "You called yourself their mother today," he said finally. "I am their mother." Serafina's voice held no doubt. "Not because I gave birth to them, but because I choose them every day." Liam reached for her hand in the darkness. Then maybe it's time we made this family official. In the distance, a coyote called across the mesa. Serafina squeezed Liam's calloused fingers and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she was home. The poison words came from Mrs. Patterson's lips like venom dripping from a snake's fangs. Ruthie had been playing quietly behind the pickle barrel while Serafina gathered supplies, small enough to go unnoticed by the women gossiping near the counter. "Unnatural, that's what she is," Mrs. Patterson declared. "A woman who can't bear children has no business pretending to be a mother." "The good Lord made her barren for a reason," another voice agreed. "Some women just ain't meant for motherhood. Those poor children don't know any better, but mark my words, she'll abandon them when something better comes along. That's what her kind does." Ruthie's small world shattered like glass hitting stone. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her thumb finding her mouth for the first time in weeks. The words carved themselves into her 5-year-old heart with brutal precision. Mama Sarah couldn't have real children. That made Ruthie and Jessie and Annabelle pretend children. Temporary children, unwanted children. The little girl slipped out the back door while Serafina finished her shopping. Her bare feet carried her through the dusty streets toward home, but home didn't feel safe anymore. Nothing felt safe. At the ranch, Ruthie avoided Serafina's eyes during dinner. She pushed food around her plate and flinched when gentle hands tried to smooth her hair. When bedtime came, she turned her face to the wall and pretended to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. The cruel words echoed in her mind until she couldn't bear them anymore. If Serafina couldn't love them properly because she wasn't a real mother, then maybe they should all just disappear. Maybe then Serafina could find a real family somewhere else. Ruthie slipped from her bed like a ghost. She gathered her few treasures in a flour sack, kissed her corn-husk doll goodbye, and crept toward the kitchen door. The night air bit through her thin nightgown, but she didn't turn back. The canyon country stretched before her like a sleeping monster. Ruthie had never been there alone, but she remembered the path from berry-picking trips with Annabelle. She would find a cave and live by herself. Then nobody would have to pretend to love her anymore. Dawn came too soon, painting the sky bloody red above the mesas. Serafina discovered the empty bed and felt her world tilt sideways. She ran through the house calling Ruthie's name, checking every closet and corner where a small girl might hide. Liam found the open kitchen door and the tiny footprints in the dust outside. His face went pale as desert sand. "She's headed for the canyons." "Why would she run?" Serafina's voice cracked like breaking timber. "I don't understand." Annabelle emerged from her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw their panic, her expression sharpened with the protective instincts of an eldest child. "What happened to Ruthie?" "She's gone." Serafina's hands shook as she reached for her shawl. "She ran away sometime in the night." Jesse appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in cowlicks. One look at their faces told him everything he needed to know. "I'll saddle the horses." "No." Serafina's voice carried steel. "You two stay here in case she comes back. Liam, take the north trail. I'll search the southern canyons." She was already moving toward the barn, her mind flooding with memories of another little girl who had felt unwanted and unloved. Serafina knew these feelings intimately. She had carried them through her own childhood like stones in her pockets. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Serafina called Ruthie's name until her throat felt raw. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something that shimmered with heat and desperation. She found the child 3 hours later, huddled in a shallow cave like a wounded animal. Ruthie's nightgown was torn and dusty. Her small face was streaked with tears and dirt. She looked up at Serafina with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "Don't make me come back," Ruthie whispered. "I know you can't really love me." Serafina felt her heart crack clean in two. She sank to her knees in the red dust, reaching for the child with trembling hands. "Who told you such a terrible thing?" "Mrs. Patterson. She said, "You're not a real mama because you can't make babies." Ruthie's voice was small and broken. "She said you'll leave us when you find a real family." The words hit Serafina like physical blows. She gathered Ruthie into her arms, feeling the child's small body shake with suppressed sobs. All her own pain, all her years of believing she was somehow less than other women because of what her body couldn't do, crystallized into this moment. "Listen to me, baby girl." Serafina's voice was fierce with love and certainty. "Family isn't about what your body can do. It's about what your heart chooses to do every single day." She held Ruthie tighter, feeling the child's breathing slowly calm against her chest. "When I was little like you, I lived in a big house with lots of other children who had no parents. I thought nobody would ever choose me because I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough or good enough." Ruthie pulled back to look at her with wide, dark eyes. "What happened?" "A woman named Miss Sarah chose me anyway. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She taught me to read and write. She braided my hair and sang me lullabies. She was my real mama in every way that mattered, even though I didn't grow in her belly." Serafina cupped Ruthie's small face in her hands. "Just like you're my real daughter in every way that matters. Not because you came from my body, but because my heart chose you the moment I saw you. Because I choose you again every morning when I wake up and every night when I tuck you in." "Really?" Ruthie's voice was barely a whisper. "Really?" Serafina kissed the child's forehead. "Some mamas grow their babies in their bellies. Other mamas grow their babies in their hearts. Both kinds of love are real. Both kinds of mamas are real." The desert wind whistled through the canyon walls, carrying away years of pain and doubt. Ruthie wrapped her small arms around Serafina's neck and held on tight. "I want to go home, Mama." The words sent warmth flooding through Serafina's chest. Not Mama Sarah anymore, just Mama. Simple and perfect and true. They rode home together on Serafina's horse, Ruthie secure in the circle of her mother's arms. The child chattered about everything she had seen in the canyon, her fears dissolving like morning mist in the growing heat. Liam was waiting in the yard when they arrived. His relief was visible from 100 yards away. Annabelle and Jessie burst from the house and surrounded them with questions and fierce hugs. That evening, as Serafina tucked Ruthie into bed, the little girl looked up with serious eyes. "Mama, are you glad God made you the kind of mama who grows babies in her heart instead of her belly?" Serafina smiled, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Every single day, sweetheart. Every single day." Outside the bedroom window, a coyote called across the desert. But inside the small house, surrounded by the family she had chosen and who had chosen her in return, Serafina had never felt more complete. The Heart Mother was finally home. The government wagon rolled into Copper Creek like a harbinger of doom. Two men in dark suits climbed down, their boots raising dust that seemed to settle over the entire town like a shroud. The taller one carried a leather satchel filled with official papers. The shorter one had the cold eyes of a man who enjoyed wielding authority over others. Eudora Finch stepped down last. She was a thin woman with sharp features and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. Her gray dress was severe as winter, buttoned to her throat despite the desert heat. She surveyed the town with the expression of someone examining insects under glass. "Primitive," she murmured to her companions, "but it will serve our purposes." Word spread through Copper Creek faster than wildfire. The government officials were asking questions about the Grady family, about 3 children who had no proper papers, about a woman who claimed to be their mother when everyone knew she couldn't have children of her own. Eli Forsyth was the first to warn them. He rode hard to the ranch, his usually neat appearance disheveled from the urgent journey. Serafina met him at the door, instantly recognizing trouble in his expression. "They're here about the children," he said without preamble. "Federal officials. They're saying Jessie, Annabelle, and Ruthie need to be placed in proper institutions." Serafina's blood turned to ice in her veins. Behind her, she heard Liam's footsteps on the kitchen floor. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter drifting through the open windows like music that might soon be silenced forever. What kind of institutions? Liam's voice was carefully controlled. Orphanages back east, schools for mixed children. They claim it's for the children's own good. Eli's hands clenched into fists. But I've heard stories about those places. They're not homes. They're warehouses for unwanted souls. Serafina stepped onto the porch, her eyes finding her children in the yard. Ruthie was teaching Jessie a clapping game while Annabelle braided wildflowers into chains. They looked so normal, so beautifully ordinary. The sight of them made her chest ache with fierce protectiveness. "How long do we have?" she asked. "They're gathering evidence first, talking to townspeople, building a case." Eli's voice dropped lower. "But Serafina, they already know things. About the children's real parentage, about your first marriage. Someone's been feeding them information." That evening, Liam found Serafina standing in his study, staring at the legal documents that had started everything. Her face was pale, but determined in the lamplight. "We have to make it legal," she said quietly. "The adoption, our marriage, everything." "Is that what you want?" Liam's voice held careful hope. "Or is it just what we need?" Serafina turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the flame. "Both. I want to be their legal mother. I want to be your wife. Not because the government is forcing us, but because this family is the truest thing I've ever known." Liam crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his calloused ones. "Then we'll fight for it. All of it." The next morning brought Eudora Finch to their door. She stood on the porch like a crow perched on a fence post, her sharp eyes taking inventory of everything she saw. Behind her, the 2 men in suits flanked her like bookends. "Mrs. Bellamy, I presume." Finch's voice was crisp as autumn air. "I'm here on official business regarding the 3 minor children in your care." "They're not in my care," Serafina replied evenly. "They're my children." "Legally, that's incorrect. You have no adoption papers, no blood relation, no legal standing whatsoever." Finch consulted a paper from her satchel. "Furthermore, your own marital status is questionable at best." Liam appeared behind Serafina, his presence solid and reassuring. "What do you want?" "To ensure these children receive proper care in appropriate facilities. They're currently being raised in an irregular household by individuals with no legal authority." Finch's eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. "The state has a duty to protect vulnerable minors." "Protect them from what?" Serafina's voice rose slightly. "From being loved? From having a home? From being raised in an unstable environment by a woman of questionable character and a man who has no legal claim to guardianship." Finch snapped her satchel shut. "The children will be evaluated and relocated within the week." The words hit like physical blows. Serafina felt the world tilt sideways, but she forced herself to remain standing. Behind her, she heard Ruthie's voice calling for Mama from the kitchen. The sound gave her strength. "You can't just take them," Liam said, his voice deadly quiet. "I can and I will. Unless you can provide legal documentation proving your right to keep them." Finch smiled without warmth. "Marriage certificates, adoption papers, proof of financial stability. Everything must be in perfect order." That afternoon, the town erupted into unexpected action. Eli Forsyth organized a letter-writing campaign. Mrs. Henderson, who had previously snubbed Serafina at church, appeared at the ranch with a character reference written in her careful script. Even gruff old Mr. McCready, who rarely spoke to anyone, contributed a testimonial about Liam's character and work ethic. The children sensed the change in atmosphere like animals sensing a coming storm. They stayed closer to Serafina and Liam, their eyes wide with worry they couldn't fully understand. "Are we in trouble, Mama?" Ruthie asked that evening as Serafina tucked her into bed. "No, sweetheart, but some people think you might be happier somewhere else." Serafina smoothed the child's curls away from her face. "They don't understand that we're already exactly where we belong." "I don't want to go anywhere else," Ruthie said firmly. "This is home." "I know, baby. We're going to fight to keep our family together." 2 days later, Liam found Serafina in the garden at sunset. She was kneeling among the tomato plants, her hands working automatically while her mind wrestled with impossible problems. "Marry me," he said simply. She looked up at him, dirt streaking her apron and worry creasing her brow. "Is this a proposal or a strategy?" "Both." He knelt beside her in the rich earth. "I love you, Serafina. Not because you're good with the children or because you make the best biscuits in Arizona. I love you because you're the strongest person I've ever known, because you choose to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. "I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise I'll stand beside you every day for the rest of our lives." Serafina looked at the ring, then at the house where their children waited, then at the man who had given her back her purpose. The government officials were circling like vultures. The future stretched ahead like an unmarked trail through hostile territory. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't walking that trail alone. "Yes," she said, taking his hand, "to all of it. The marriage, the fight, the family. All of it." As if summoned by their words, 3 small faces appeared at the kitchen window, watching, hoping, trusting that the adults they loved would find a way to keep them safe. The battle for their family was just beginning. Eudora Finch's smile was sharp as a blade when she returned to the ranch 3 days later. This time she came alone, her confidence radiating like heat from desert stones. She found Serafina hanging laundry on the line, the white sheets snapping in the wind like surrender flags. "Mrs. Bellamy, I have wonderful news." Finch's voice dripped false sweetness. "I've been researching your background more thoroughly." Serafina's hands stilled on the clothespins. Something in Finch's tone made her stomach clench with dread. "It seems your divorce in St. Louis was never properly filed." Finch consulted her ever-present papers with theatrical precision. "Your first husband, Charles Bellamy, remarried 6 months after your supposed divorce. But according to Missouri state records, he never actually dissolved your marriage." The clothespin fell from Serafina's numb fingers. "That's impossible. I have the papers." "You have fraudulent documents. Your husband wanted to remarry quickly, so he simply forged the divorce decree." Finch's eyes glittered with triumph. "Which means you're still legally married to Charles Bellamy. Your upcoming marriage to Mr. Grady would be bigamous, illegal. And it certainly doesn't give you any legal standing as guardian to these children." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Serafina gripped the clothesline to steady herself, her mind racing through the implications. Everything they had planned, everything they had hoped for, crumbled like sandcastles before a tide. "Furthermore," Finch continued, clearly savoring every word, "a woman living in sin with a man while still married to another cannot possibly be considered a fit guardian. The children will be removed tomorrow morning." That evening, dark clouds gathered over the desert like an omen. The air felt heavy with moisture and electricity, promising a storm that could wash away everything in its path. Inside the ranch house, the family huddled together while the wind began to howl around the windows. Ruthie had developed a cough during the day. By dinner time, her small face was flushed with fever. She picked at her food listlessly, leaning against Serafina's side like a wilted flower. "Just tired, Mama?" she whispered when Serafina felt her burning forehead. But by midnight, the child was burning with fever so high she spoke to people who weren't there. Her breathing came in short, rattling gasps that filled the house with dread. Serafina bathed her with cool water and sang lullabies, but Ruthie's condition only worsened. "She needs medicine," Liam said, his face grave in the lamplight. "Dr. Morrison has laudanum and fever powders in town. The storm's getting worse." Serafina looked toward the windows, where rain now lashed against the glass like angry fists. "You can't ride in this. I can't not ride in this." Liam was already reaching for his coat. "She'll die without medicine." Serafina caught his arm, her fingers digging into the rough fabric. "Then we'll both lose everything. The children need you alive." Ruthie needs me to save her life. He cupped Serafina's face in his calloused hands. Take care of the others. I'll be back before dawn. He disappeared into the storm like a ghost swallowed by darkness. The wind screamed around the house with demonic fury, rattling the windows and doors as if trying to break inside. Serafina held Ruthie close, feeling the child's life flickering like a candle flame in a hurricane. Annabelle and Jessie sat vigil beside the bed, their young faces etched with worry beyond their years. They had lost parents before. They understood how quickly love could be torn away by forces beyond anyone's control. Tell us the story about the princess who grew babies in her heart, Jessie whispered, his stutter barely noticeable in his distress. Serafina's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and fear, but she began the tale she had created for them, a story about a princess who couldn't have children the usual way, so she loved other people's children so fiercely that they became hers through the pure power of choice. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Ruthie's fever spiked higher. Her breathing became more labored. Serafina found herself praying to a god she had often questioned, bargaining with the universe for one small life. Dawn was breaking gray and terrible when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Liam burst through the door like a man pursued by demons, his clothes soaked and torn, his face haggard with exhaustion. Ice clung to his beard and eyebrows. His hands were so frozen he could barely hold the precious medicine bottles. "How is she?" he gasped. "Dying," Serafina whispered. They worked together to force the medicine between Ruthie's cracked lips. The child was barely conscious, her small body burning with fever that seemed to consume her from within. For long, agonizing minutes nothing changed. Then, slowly, her breathing began to ease. The flush faded from her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on Serafina's tear-streaked face. "Mama," she whispered, "did you stay with me?" "Every second, baby girl. Every second." Liam collapsed into a chair, his strength finally giving out. The ride through the storm had nearly killed him, but he had succeeded. Ruthie would live. But their victory was short-lived. Even as the child's fever broke, wagon wheels crunched in the yard outside. Eudora Finch had returned with a sheriff and 2 men carrying official papers. "Time's up," Finch announced from the doorway. "The children come with us now." Serafina stood between the officials and the bed where Ruthie lay weak but breathing. Behind her, Annabelle and Jessie pressed close, their small hands clutching her skirts. "She's been sick all night. She nearly died." Serafina's voice was raw with exhaustion and desperation. "All the more reason to get her proper medical care in an institution." Finch's expression showed no mercy. "Step aside, Mrs. Bellamy. Or should I say, Mrs. Charles Bellamy, since that's your legal name." Liam struggled to his feet, swaying with exhaustion but determined to make one last stand. "You can't take them. They're our children." "They were never your children. They belong to the state now." Finch nodded to her men. "Take them." The officials moved forward like an advancing army. Serafina felt her world cracking apart, all her love and sacrifice meaning nothing in the face of cold legal documents. But as the men reached for Ruthie, the child's weak voice cut through the tension like a sword. "Wait." She struggled to sit up, her small face fierce despite her weakness. "I have something to say." Ruthie's small voice carried surprising strength as she struggled to sit up in bed. Her fever-bright eyes fixed on Eudora Finch with startling intensity for such a young child. "My mama didn't leave me when I was dying," Ruthie said clearly. "She stayed all night. She sang to me when I was scared. That's what real mamas do." The sheriff, a weathered man with kind eyes, paused in his advance. Something in the child's words seemed to strike him deeply. "Maybe we should hear what the little one has to say." "Nonsense," Finch snapped. "Children don't understand legal matters." "But we understand love," Annabelle said, stepping forward with the dignity of someone far older than her 12 years. "And we understand the difference between people who care about us and people who just want to control us." Jesse moved beside his sister, his stutter completely gone in his determination to protect his family. "Mama Sarah taught me that words have power when they come from truth. The truth is she chose us every day, even when it was hard. Eli Forsythe appeared in the doorway, flanked by half the town. Word of the confrontation had spread, and Copper Creek citizens had come to witness what would happen to the family they had come to respect. "Sheriff Hawkins," Eli called out, "I have additional evidence that might interest the court." He held up a telegram, his face grim with purpose. "I wired St. Louis yesterday about Mrs. Bellamy's marriage situation. Turns out Charles Bellamy was arrested last month for bigamy. He's been forging divorce papers and selling them to women he wanted to abandon. The state of Missouri has declared all his false divorces legally void, making Mrs. Bellamy's original divorce legitimate after all." Finch's face went white as fresh snow. "That's impossible." "Furthermore," Eli continued, "I received word this morning that certain federal officials have been accepting bribes to remove mixed-race children from stable homes and place them in institutions that pay handsomely for residence." His eyes met Finch's with steel resolve. "The investigation into these practices is quite thorough." The sheriff's expression hardened as he looked at Finch with new understanding. "Ma'am, I think you'd better come with me. Seems we have some questions to discuss back in town." "This is preposterous," Finch sputtered. "I have orders." "From who?" Sheriff Hawkins stepped closer. "Because according to this telegram, your authority was revoked yesterday pending investigation into your methods." As the sheriff led Finch away, her protests echoing across the yard, Dr. Morrison pushed through the crowd. The old physician had ridden out despite the storm's aftermath, carrying his black bag and wearing an expression of professional concern. He examined Ruthie thoroughly while the adults waited in tense silence. Finally, he straightened with a satisfied nod. "This child received excellent care during her crisis. Her fever broke cleanly, and she's responding well to treatment." He looked directly at Serafina. "You probably saved her life with your nursing." Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife who had previously snubbed Serafina, stepped forward with uncharacteristic humility. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Bellamy. I've watched how you care for these children, and I've been wrong about you. Dead wrong." One by one, the townspeople who had gathered began to speak. They talked about Jessie's improvement in school, about Annabelle's helpfulness at the church social, about Ruthie's sweet nature that charmed everyone she met. They spoke of Serafina's dignity in the face of prejudice and Liam's unwavering devotion to his family. "This family belongs together," old Mr. McCready declared, his gruff voice carrying across the crowd. "Anyone with eyes can see they're bound by something stronger than law or blood." Judge Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's husband who had ridden out from the county seat, cleared his throat. "Based on the evidence presented and the testimony of these citizens, I see no reason why Mr. Grady shouldn't be granted permanent legal guardianship of these children. And Mrs. Bellamy, your marital status having been clarified, there's no legal impediment to your marriage." 3 weeks later, spring flowers bloomed across the desert as if celebrating new beginnings. The Grady Ranch buzzed with activity as neighbors arrived carrying covered dishes and wearing their Sunday best. Serafina stood before the mirror in the bedroom she would soon share with Liam, adjusting the simple white dress Mrs. Henderson had sewn for the occasion. The silver ring Liam had given her caught the morning light, but the real treasure was the sound of children's laughter drifting through the open window. Ruthie burst into the room, her cheeks pink with health and excitement. She wore a dress made from the same fabric as Serafina's, with wildflowers woven into her dark curls. "Mama, Papa says it's time. Everyone's waiting." Serafina knelt to hug the child who had nearly been lost to fever and bureaucracy. "Are you ready for this?" "Sweetheart, I've been ready forever," Ruthie said solemnly. "We all have." The ceremony took place in the ranch's front yard, under cottonwood trees that Liam had planted when he first claimed the land. Eli Forsythe officiated, his voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd. Annabelle and Jessie stood as witnesses, their faces glowing with joy. They had helped decorate the space with desert wildflowers and ribbons salvaged from old dresses. When Liam and Serafina exchanged vows, the children joined hands with them, creating a circle of commitment that encompassed the entire family. "Do you promise to choose each other through hardship and hope, in sickness and health, through all the challenges that life may bring? Eli asked. We do, they answered in unison, 4 voices speaking as one. The celebration lasted until sunset, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half of Arizona territory. As the last guests departed under a canopy of emerging stars, the family gathered on the front porch. Ruthie climbed into Seraphina's lap while Jesse and Annabelle flanked Liam in his rocking chair. The desert wind whispered promises of rain and new growth. Tell us the story again, Mama, Jesse requested. About the princess who grew babies in her heart. Seraphina smiled, her arms tightening around the children who had taught her the true meaning of motherhood. Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought she had failed at the most important thing in the world. She didn't know that the most important thing wasn't what her body could do, but what her heart could choose. A year later, when a new family arrived in Copper Creek seeking acceptance, the townspeople would point them toward the schoolhouse where Seraphina taught children of all backgrounds. They would tell the story of the woman who couldn't have children, but became the finest mother in Arizona territory anyway. And when asked about her secret, Seraphina would smile and say, I have 3 who call me Mama, and that makes me the richest mother in all the world. The desert wind would carry her words across the mesas, where they would settle like seeds in fertile ground, growing into legends of love that chose rather than claimed, of families built on faith rather than blood, and of mothers who proved that the heart's capacity for love knows no earthly limitations.